a breakfast of city men and women. And I said the problem is, in a game like this, if you're an insurance broker, if you take a year off on maternity leave, the day you come back to that desk, you're worth far less than you were.
But what interests me, because you will have had endless conversations with journalists saying to you, you've said this, you've said that.
Of course.
And you're basically now saying, no, it's all very reasonable, and I was at a breakfast, and actually I'm a terribly reasonable chat, and sitting here, you seem terribly...
Of course.
No, absolutely. No, but the thing is, it stretches a little bit of credibility to suggest that when you say that, well, I don't know, when you... around the Cologne attacks, when you sort of suggested somehow...
Well, you guys didn't want to talk about it.
No, hang on. That might be one thing.
You guys wanted to brush it all under the carpet, pretend it wasn't happening. But all a bit too difficult, wasn't it, for the political elite to admit they'd made a catastrophic mistake.
But, Nigel, to say, as I think you did at the time, to say, look, it's more likely that people are going to be more raped in this country if we don't leave the European Union. To say, but that was a reason, I was at breakfast or I was...
I didn't say that, actually, but what I did say was we'd make ourselves much safer from terrorism and other kinds of attacks if we controlled our borders in a much more rigorous way than before, and I'd stand by that right now.
Well, we'll come to it later, because we're not going to control the borders at all, but we'll come to that in a minute.
Well, I'm aware of that, which, by the way, does make me angry.
Well, actually, and that's, in a sense, the next bit that I'll come to in a minute is where...
I want to say this to you. My politics has not been based on anger, but it's been based on frustration. And the people that I've reached out to, don't forget, we've taken UKIP from naught to winning a national election in 2014, all right? Now, the perception is that the UKIP voter is very red-faced, very angry, screams and shouts a lot, and actually, were they just voting UKIP as a protest? And that was said again and again and again. It's a protest vote. Even in 2014, when you polled people who'd voted UKIP, they said, oh, no, we're not protesting. We're voting UKIP because we believe in what they're saying. So there was always a lot more positivity to the movement than anyone's ever given credit for.
No, I mean, look, I don't dispute that there are... I found this in my then constituency before I was rudely spat out last year. I met scores, hundreds, maybe thousands of really decent, good people who voted Brexit for perfectly, from their point of view, legitimate reason. I may disagree with them. So I'm not. I hope I've never sort of
wanting change,
yes,
and anger.
Well, we'll come to that in the next. I think the great difficulty
thing
is that saying you're against the status quo is quite different to building a new future, which we'll come to next. But before we get onto that, can I just ask you a question I'm asking all my guests, which is, who would you like to be stuck in a lift with, and why?
Blair. Do you know what?
Politician Blair, not the policeman. No.
Not Lionel Blair, right?
No, what is it? Tony Blair.
I'd love 90 minutes with Blair. It seems to me that he...
I'm sure that can be arranged.
Campbell, he and Campbell and Mandelson are just not prepared to admit at any point they got anything wrong in that 10 years when they ran the country. And in particular... obviously Iraq's an obvious one that we could talk about, but in particular what I'd like to talk about is, does he not understand what open-door immigration has done to communities, has done to people's sense of belonging with each other, has done to people's wages, has done to their ability to get a GP appointment, has done, frankly, on the amount of time it takes to drive the kids to school. I'd love to drill down and to find out whether somewhere inside that tough Blair shell there is a little bit of remorse about what he did. Okay,
so we need to go away and find a lift somewhere where we can lock you and Tony Blair into. As long as there are little cameras on the wall, which can on-the-wall documentary of this.
He'd be horrified.
Without in any way wishing to intervene, I suspect he'll turn down this game. But just on that, but not to try and be Blair in this situation. I mean, of course, one of the things I suspect they would say is, firstly, there's very little evidence that it's had that depressing effect on wages, but crucially, and very interestingly, in the referendum, as you'll know, with the exception of parts of Lincolnshire and the sort of fruit and vegetable picking parts of the east of England, overwhelmingly, the areas with the lowest levels of immigration voted in the highest numbers for Brexit, and the areas like London, where there were the highest levels of immigration, voted the lowest. So it just isn't true to say that there was a direct, because it's just demonstrably not the case, that there's a direct link between
there is something
the presence of people in a... Because you just said you don't understand how...
You guys look at things in terms of GDP numbers and what Goldman Sachs say, but there's something called community. And when people see, for example, if you lived in Essex, all right, and you were driving into London, And you saw what had happened in many parts of East London, where in areas it is unrecognisable now as being a British city. You say to yourself, we do not want that.
I don't want to interrupt, but I've heard you say this before. Well, my point is a slightly more specific one, which is that I think something that you guys struggle to explain, which is why in those communities where the reality, rather than the allegation or perception of large numbers of people from elsewhere living in their midst, actually the reaction overwhelmingly, not everywhere, overwhelmingly has been to vote for...
Because there are fewer of them to vote. Just look at the numbers.
No.
There are fewer of them to vote.
Let's not have a psychological debate. You're listening to Anger Management with Nick Clegg, talking to Nigel Farage. Nigel, I now want to bring us up to date, to now. So the country was on the 23rd of June 2016, pretty evenly divided. It was a very sort of knife-edge vote in the end. I just want to talk to you a little bit.
1.6 million's knife edge, is it?
Well, wait on. What was it? 650,000 voters make the difference. Anyway, let's come to that in a minute. You've got millions of people expecting great things from Brexit, and millions of people who are lamenting Brexit. And I just want to ask you a little bit, not so much about your views, but what do we now do going forward as a democracy with such kind of polarised emotions? I mean, firstly, on the losers, those who voted Remain, right? 16.1 million people is more than have ever voted for a winning government. So this is a huge number of people. And by the way, the vast majority of young people particularly voted differently.
Which is bizarre, isn't it?
Well, hang on. I don't think it is, but let's just... What I want to know from people like you is because when I hear you say, Theresa the appeaser, and I don't like this Brexit, and I want it harder, and I want it faster, and I want it purer, is... Surely one of the basic functions of a mature democracy is that losers are not left empty-handed. Their nose is not rubbed in it. What do you say to those millions, and particularly those youngsters who have to live with the consequences of Brexit, good or bad? Surely with victory comes responsibility. So what responsibility do you have towards the losers?
I think what's really interesting is that you would get an impression of how the country feels with a year to go on Brexit from London. That is very different to the rest of the country. There is a very significant chunk of people who voted Remain, and goodness knows how many, Nick, I've spoken to. Well, Nigel, my heart was with you, but I voted Remain because I've got a new business. I've got a mortgage. They were actually scared, of all of this Project Fear stuff. A lot of them are saying now, actually, do you know what? I don't have those concerns anymore. There are also people out there called Democrats who voted Remain and respect the result. So actually, how big is the group of people who are still genuinely upset and angry about Brexit? It may be 20%, but I tell you something, Nick, it isn't much bigger than that. So I feel there has been actually in the country a bit of a coming together, an acceptance. Look, we've done this, let's jolly well get on with it. Now, on to your point about young people. Chuck Ramona said the other day that we'd stolen people's future from them. Well, I very much hope we have, because this European Union is becoming authoritarian, very dangerous. You've really got to look at what's happening in Catalonia and the way the European Union has responded to it to realise that whatever the dream of this European project may have been 40 years ago, it's moved a very long way from it.
Can we just, because you're very good at the high horse stuff about how the European Union is ghastly, I just want to just focus a bit on this, on the people. So, right. we can make claim and counter-claim about whether people have shifted on the young people. Listen, you and others have said we are leaving because that is the democratic choice. Mm-hmm. On young people, it is not the democratic choice that they made, right? I mean, estimates vary a bit, but the turnout was relatively high for 18 to 24-year-olds by historical standards, over 60%, and over 70% of those are estimated to have voted to Remain. There is no, in my experience, you tell me you're a historian, or you have great interest in history, I don't know of any other mature democracy that takes such an abrupt and radical decision about its future against the explicit stated wishes of those who have to inhabit the future. To say to them, they're getting over it, they're reconciled, is not really a good answer.
It's very odd.
Democratically,
it's very, very odd, because across the rest of Europe, what is happening, it's the youth who are rebelling.
I know, but that's not what happened.
No.
I mean, you may not like it, but that's not what happened.
But this is really interesting, isn't it? Had we, as you wished, joined the euro, it would have been the youth that had taken us out.
I'm talking about now, right? Let's not talk about...
All across Europe, the under-30s are rebelling against the European Union form of government.
Here. My point is that...
And I don't think frankly, I think there is a total failure in our education system. at both secondary and at university level.
Nigel,
we are not
hear
teaching.
yourself speak.
We
You
are
sound
not
like the
teaching
establishment
people-
you criticise.
We are not teaching people critical thinking anymore. We're teaching people this is the right point of view, and anybody
Nigel,
that holds an alternative point of view is a bad person.
Nigel, I really genuinely didn't expect this of you. You are now literally sounding like the establishment you criticise. You don't appear to either like or accept the reality.
No, I know.
Hang on. You're saying it's because of education, or they're not doing what other young people do in other parts of Europe. They did. The overwhelming majority of young people, and by the way, in as much as cephalological evidence is worth anything,
2 to 1 probably, yeah.
suggests that young people still fiercely believe that this is the wrong future being imposed upon them. You can't wish it away and say our education's wrong, or they should behave like young people elsewhere. They didn't. You have said, others have said, we're doing this as an act of democracy.
Yep.
I think it is profoundly undemocratic to do something which is so against the will of those who have to live with the consequences of it.
Well, a country is made up of different regions, of different people, and it was a collective vote. I'm astonished.
What do you say to the young people?
I'm astonished. I'm astonished that the young people look upon the European Union as being this bright, shiny
Nigel,
future.
You said you're astonished. That's not the point. They do, okay? You have to just kind of get over that.
But, Nick, they will change their minds. They will change their minds.
You sound like every inch the establishment politician. They will find out they're wrong eventually.
You see,
because I say so.
What you can't see is that the European project is disintegrating before our eyes. It's happening.
Nigel, I've heard this for 40 years.
Well, the East-West split, if you look at the fight going on with Hungary and Poland and the Commission, if you look at what the Euro has done to Greece. So I'm confident that reality...
They'll grow up and they'll agree with you eventually.
I think they will change their minds.
Right.
And a few weeks ago we had the Italian elections. Fascinating that 62% of under-30s voted for very rebellious political parties.
Yeah, but Nigel, look, we'll move on to the other side of the equation, which is those who now expect great things from Brexit. I only point out to you that the language you're using now is identical to the established language. No, it is, because you're basically saying they voted a particular way.
Yep.
I don't understand it. I'm astonished, and they're wrong, and they'll see their mistake eventually.
I accept it. And we've
How
got
undemocratic can you be?
And we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do. I mean, quite frankly, if we reran that referendum, and I pray we don't, if we reran the referendum, the Leave side should do it completely differently. We just need coachloads of students coming from all over Europe going around our universities.
Can I just ask about the other side of the equation then? So you've got now, so we've talked about the 16.1 million, and particularly the youngsters. I mean, one of the things that I think was masterful on behalf of the pro-Brexit campaign in the referendum was, in a sense, you and Johnson and Gove and Kate Howe, you could all basically say you were for the same thing, but not actually explain that you meant different things by Brexit. One way or another, lots of people have very raised expectations about what Brexit's going to bring, right? Some of the stuff is obvious, 350 million for the NHS, which you say you didn't. But anyway, that's what a lot of people think.
No, I thought hard against that,
what happens when they don't get the utopia?
Brexit's about one thing and one thing only that united all of us. It's about independence. And I care about this, having led the UK Independence Party for all those years. This is about the United Kingdom becoming a normal country once again, rather like 200 other countries that exist in the world. It's about us making our own decisions. It does not stop us for one moment cooperating very closely with European countries or elsewhere.
Can I just press you a bit? So what about the expectations which have been raised and what happened? Because you see, I have a view. People say to folk like me, they say, you are risking a great backlash of anger if you seek to give people another say. Hang on a minute. I personally think, well, obviously disagree on this, is that the real backlash, which is being risked now, is that these utopian promises have been made to millions of people. They're clearly not going to be delivered. We're going to abide by European Court of Justice rulings. We're paying money to the European Union.
But that's because of the government.
But Nigel, that's what's going to happen.
So the anger, actually, if there's anger out there today, right, if there's anger from Brexit voters out there today, it's actually as much against Theresa May and the way that she's doing Brexit.
Yeah, but that's because you can comfort yourself by claiming that if you were in charge, your pure, unadulterated, uncompromising version of Brexit would happen. Life doesn't work like that. You always have to compromise with reality, and no one can impose their particular...
Ultimately, there is one big thing here, isn't there? And that's March 29th next year. Now, let's be honest. Whatever kind of Brexit we get, and it is likely with Mrs May in charge that I'm going to be deeply frustrated by, the lack
foreign fishermen will keep their quotas in our waters.
I mean, things like that, which are just outrageous.
Yeah.
I mean,
we're going to pay money to the...
Can you imagine...
I know, but Nigel, that's what's going to happen.
Nick,
so what happens to the voters?
Can you imagine any other country in the world willingly giving away its fishing rights? I can't. I can't think of one that would do it. Anywhere in the world. Anywhere. So I'm going to have my frustrations, but here's the big thing. If we leave the Treaty of Rome at midnight on March the 29th
11
next year,
PM UK time.
we will then be an independent nation.
So Nigel, my question to you is not so much about what you think happens on 11 PM on the 29th of March 2019. My question is a slightly, if I may say so, a slightly bigger one, which